все добре. Але подивіться, де вам краще. Тут чи трошки далі. Ходіть сюди. Попробуйте. Де вам добре?
Так, тут є добре.
Якщо ви так станете, буде добре.
Ага.
То буде все рівно на вас.
О, так, так, то буде дуже добре, так.
О,
Так. Прошу.
ти
О,
чув?
опустити. О,
Де ти пам'ятаєте? Ви під себе робите.
так. О. Я можу тримати одним пальцем.
Сходите, щоб ви не впали.
Добре. Ні, я під свій. О, то там, добре, дякую. Окей, то ми тепер. І так твоє добре? О, добре. Дякую. Тарас. Good evening, Council of Ukraine, Alexander Svistun, Reverend Father Oleg Krivokulsky, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lydia Tkachuk, and on behalf of the Ukrainian Genocide Famine Foundation, USA, it's my pleasure to welcome you to Saints Volodymyr and Olha Ukrainian Catholic Church at this evening's program, Genocide in Europe. Tonight's event consists of speakers on the genocide against Ukrainians, followed by a concert. 2022 marks the beginning of the 90th anniversary of one of the greatest tragedies in Ukrainian history, the 1932-33 genocide against Ukrainians. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin and his totalitarian regime committed an act of genocide by organizing an artificial famine by confiscating land, grain, and cattle, killing over 10 million innocent people. The current war in Ukraine is also an example of genocide against Ukrainians. Russia's recent aggression in Ukraine attempts to suppress a freedom-loving nation and its social, cultural, historical, economic, and national development. We must be aware of what is happening in the world and do everything in our power to prevent future genocides and atrocities. I invite Council of Ukraine, Alexander Svistun, for short remarks.
Good evening, Reverend Hadzalic, ladies and gentlemen. The renowned Italian poet Dante gave the following chilling description of hell. When I awoke, before the dawn amid the sleep, I heard my sons weep and ask for bread. In 1932-1933, Stalin created such a hell to suppress Ukraine's independence movement by starving Ukrainians to death in a country then known as a breadbasket of Europe. Within 2 years of the Bolshevism genocide, Ukraine has lost over 10 million innocently murdered citizens. A quarter of our rural population, men, women, and children, died or were already dying. The rest of the men were so exhausted that they had no strength to bury their bodies of their relatives and neighbors. As wrote by Robert Conquest, one of the most famous explorers of Holodomor, the harvest of sorrow. Incredibly, the most of the 20th century, the Holodomor was hidden genocide. The memory of national tragedies and dark times unites us, makes us stronger and wiser. Today, the enemy again tries to divide us, make us quarrel, spread discord and hatred among us. Today, we need unity more than ever. Holodomor tragedy wouldn't have never happened in Ukraine if it had been an independent and democratic state. Such disasters like genocide are features of dictatorship and totalitarianism. It will never happen again in Ukraine, which has chosen the European path. Glory to Ukraine.
This evening's speakers are Dr. Victoria Malko, a faculty member and founding coordinator of the Holodomor Studies program in the Department of History at California State University, Fresno. She is the author of The Ukrainian Intelligentsia and Genocide, The Struggle for History, Language, and Culture in the 1920s and 1930s, published by Lexington Books in 2021. Dr. Myroslava Antonovych, Doctor of Law, Head of the Center for International Human Rights and Associate Professor of the Faculty of Law at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. She is a former judge ad hoc of the European Court of Human Rights, 2010-14. Dr. Antonovych was a Fulbright Scholar at the University of Cincinnati in Ohio and President of the Ukrainian Fulbright Association. She is the author of over 120 publications in public international law, international human rights, and genocide studies. Dr. Kristina Hook is an assistant professor of conflict management at Kennesaw State University School of Conflict Management, Peace Building, and Development. A specialist in Ukraine and Russia. Her expertise includes genocide and the mass atrocity prevention, emerging technologies and disinformation, post-conflict reconstruction, and war-related environment degradation. Her publications, Foreign Affairs, Why Russia's War in Ukraine is Genocide, and Vladimir Putin's Plan to Crush Ukraine, is part of a long tradition.
Reverend Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, every year for the past 90 years, Ukrainians around the world commemorate victims of the Holodomor, Soviet genocide in the words of Raphael Lemkin, the classic example of the eradication not of individuals only, but of an ethos, its history, culture. The goals of the commemoration are to remember the victims, raise awareness of the crime, and to counter the denial. In the case of the Holodomor, the perpetrators were never prosecuted by the International Criminal Tribunal. The regime continued to exist. But before there was a commemoration, there was a protest. On December 17, 1933, the New York Times reported that more than 100 Ukrainian Americans were attacked and injured by American communists here in Chicago, when 5,000 marched on the streets to protest the killing of millions in Soviet Ukraine. Ukrainian women in diaspora, such as Milena Rudnitska, brought the issue to the attention of the League of Nations, and Nelly Peluhovich of the Ukrainian National Women's League of America wrote a letter to First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. But the League of Nations was powerless, and Ukraine was not a member of the League of Nations. The US diplomatic recognition of the USSR, when millions of Ukrainians were wiped off the face of the earth without a prayer or a line in history textbooks, left an open wound in the souls of the Ukrainian people. Beginning with the 50th anniversary of the Holodomor in 1983, US presidents have issued statements with regard to condemning this crime against humanity. In 2018, the US Senate reiterated the findings of Dr. James Mace in his 1988 report to Congress that Joseph Stalin and his accomplices committed genocide against Ukrainians. Internationally, the Vatican, American neighbors, Canada and Mexico, most nations in the Baltics, Eastern Europe, and the Caucasus, several in Western Europe, Latin America, as well as Australia, have offered similar recognition on parliamentary and executive levels. In 2015, the National Holodomor Memorial was opened in Washington, D.C. to honor the memory of 7 to 10 million victims of the Holodomor. On November 11th, this day last year, Ukrainian Americans for Biden released a letter. They sent it to President Biden asking that a presidential statement be issued that officially recognizes the Holodomor as genocide. More often than not, however, genocides are forgotten. As a result, textbooks on the Holodomor are now being written so that students can learn about it. There are still significant challenges, as teachers who have no Ukrainian friends or students have never heard about the Holodomor, and so they are reluctant to teach about it. Resistance to recognizing the Holodomor as genocide suggests that it was not the same as the Holocaust, or the Armenian, or Bosnian, or Rwandan genocides. By denying the recognition of the Holodomor as genocide, pundits have raised the bar on the type or scope of cruelty that needs to be perpetrated before it could be called what it was, a genocide committed against the Ukrainian people. This can happen simply because some people don't feel like defining the Holodomor, a genocide. The Holodomor denial, the revision of the past, and rehabilitation of Stalinism in contemporary Russia have led to the outbreak of the current full-scale war against Ukraine. History helps us see that the genocide against the Ukrainian people is happening again, but many bystanders prefer not to see it. They assure their consciousness that they are good and civilized people because the killing of Ukrainians is happening far away. They believe there is nothing that they can do about it. They abdicate their responsibility to see and act. 90 years ago, the leaders of the democratic world turned a blind eye to murder and granted diplomatic recognition to the Soviet Union. The crime has never been prosecuted, is being repeated in Ukraine again. Today's concert is in itself a form of commemoration of the Holodomor victims and victims of other genocides of the 20th century. Music by Ukrainian, Armenian, Jewish, and other composers will help us remember the innocents, honor the survivors, heal post-genocidal syndrome wounds, and discern the signs of violence against national groups and act to stop it. All genocides must be recognized and acknowledged to effectively learn from history and to ensure that such atrocities are not repeated in the future. Thank you.
Reverend Father, honorable members of the audience, Slava Isusu Christu. In my short speech, I would briefly compare two genocides committed against the Ukrainian nation within the period of 100 years. The Holodomor-Genocide in the first half of the 20th century and the ongoing Russian genocide against the Ukrainian nation. Sorry, I can hardly keep remaining calm when I speak about this ongoing genocide. These two genocides were committed by the same perpetrator, Russian Empire, which was called the USSR, the Soviet Union, in the previous century, and is called Russian Federation nowadays. Whatever the name might be, it remains the same perpetrator, Russian Empire. The main element of genocide, the intent or dolus specialis to destroy national or ethnic group, which should be proved for a crime to be qualified as genocide and not crime against humanity or other crimes, was present both in the Holodomor and is present in the ongoing genocide. It was implicit in the case of the Holodomor and was explicitly articulated nowadays. In general, circumstances which may evidence the intent to commit genocide are different, and according to the case law of International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, and the International Criminal Court, the intent may be inferred from the following factors: the scale of atrocities committed, the general nature of atrocities committed, the fact of deliberately or systematically targeting victims on account of their membership of a particular group, the general political doctrine which gave rise to the acts, the repetition of destructive and discriminatory acts. This intent might also be inferred either from words or deeds and may be demonstrated by a pattern of purposeful actions. International Criminal Court also explained that the existence of intent and knowledge can be inferred from the relevant facts and circumstances. What concerns the Holodomor-Genocide, there is plenty of evidence of intent to destroy Ukrainians in part, as they were too numerous to be eliminated at once. What is going on in Ukraine nowadays proves that Russia has intent to destroy Ukrainians in whole. Public speeches of President Putin and his henchmen, in which they deny that Ukrainians constitute a nation, are well known. Thus, in his televised address to the nation on 22nd February 2022, Putin explicitly stated that Ukraine was always an integral part of Russia's own history, culture, spiritual space. The intent to destroy the Ukrainian nation could also be inferred from the numerous speeches of Putin, Medvedev, Duma deputies, and other politicians and journalists that constitute the general political doctrine which gave rise to the acts that might be qualified as genocide. On the other hand, those statements might themselves be qualified as incitement to commit genocide by Russian militaries under the Genocide Convention. Let me remind you that on 24th February 2022, there should have started final solution of the Ukrainian question in the course of a brief up to 3-day special military operation as planned by Russia. The phrasing final solution of the question was used by Hitler during the Second World War in relation to Jews, which was qualified as genocide of the Jewish people, the Holocaust. This very phrasing was used in the article by Timofey Sergeytsev, What Russia Should Do with Ukraine, the manifesto, the map of Russian genocide against the Ukrainian nation, published by Russian state news agency RIA Novosti, with clearly genocidal narrative, formulating the idea of destroying the Ukrainian nation. Another issue I would like to briefly touch is the targeted group, which was victim of genocide in the territory of Ukraine in the first part of the 20th century during the Holodomor, and which is this group nowadays, since 24th February 2022. The Holodomor was aimed at destroying the Ukrainian ethnic group, both in the territory of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and in Northern Caucasus. And it was meant to suppress the Ukrainian national liberation movement. Ukrainians have not existed then as a separate political nation. Now we do have a Ukrainian political nation, and it is clear that genocidal Russia's intent is to destroy the Ukrainian nation as a whole, the national group. My doctor was shot at his back in his house near Kyiv in March 2022, and after that he was banned because he belonged to the Ukrainian nation. His corpse was found a month later after Russian militaries left Kyiv region. Thousands, and I would say even up to, there are different figures, but up to 100,000 civilians, women, children, were killed, tortured, raped, disappeared. Enumerated genocidal acts, those which are enumerated in the Genocide Conventions, has changed since the Holodomor, but they remain as cruel and as inhuman as they used to be a century ago. My colleague, Kristina Hook, would continue comparing these two genocides. Thank you for your attention. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much for having us here tonight. Thank you for having this event, which brings together both what is occurring in Ukraine now, what occurred in Ukraine in the past, as well as the stories of other communities that have experienced genocide. I think that one of the things we've all learned this year and just had reinforced for us is how important international solidarity, how much it matters. And so on that note, I come today as a person who's been in the field of comparative genocide studies for 15 years, specializing in the Holodomor, but often putting it in conversation with some of the other cases that are going to be represented in music tonight. And so as we enter this event, I'll keep my remarks on Ukraine, but also speaking about them as they compare and as they help us understand something beyond Ukraine as well. And I've always said that understanding the Ukrainian Holodomor, especially to my fellow Americans, is so important. Sometimes I even have to explain what it is, that it was an artificially induced famine under Joseph Stalin that killed millions of people in less than 2 years. And it's always been important to talk about this. Doing so honors the victims, it provides critical insights into the events that shape the contemporary Ukrainians that we are watching with respect today. And it confronts the dark legacy of the Soviet Union. But now, as many of us know, in light of Vladimir Putin's escalation of an 8-year war, increasing the world's knowledge of these terrible crimes are also even more urgent. Since February 2022, evidence of systematic war crimes by Russians against Ukrainians, the Ukrainian National Group, are mounting, and the specter of genocide, which we have always said in my field and in public, never again, is now emerging in Europe. Now we must also confront and analyze patterns of violence found in the Ukrainian Holodomor from these fresh perspectives with great urgency. We must question whether these events are another link in the chain of violence waged by Moscow, another sign that the Kremlin is threatened by a free, prosperous, and independent Ukraine. As a comparative genocide scholar and an anthropologist who began working in Ukraine in 2015, I've published and written about my view that what is happening from a comparative genocide perspective also meets the scholarly criteria for genocide. More than any other subject, though, what I always try to communicate, more than any other subject, understanding the Ukrainian Holodomor helped me to confront the dark possibilities of Putin escalating this year, but it also helped me to understand that the courageous Ukrainian resistance that we're also watching was just as likely. Understanding these 1930s events through words of survivors and through their descendants is how I came to that conclusion. And I'd like to read just a small snippet from a colleague who is at the Holodomor Museum in Kyiv. And I'd like to tell you something that she told me in May of 2017. So not in February, not this year, in May of 2017. She is a younger colleague of mine, and so she said, "I am a child of independent Ukraine. The Russian occupation of Crimea and the war in eastern Ukraine were so unexpected for me. But when I remembered the history of the Holodomor, I understood that Ukrainians should have foreseen this. What is happening in Donbass and Crimea is not the end of Russian encroachment towards Ukraine. Today, the Russian president denies the fact that the Holodomor is genocide. Actually, he denies the existence of the Ukrainian nation." And so as we confront how the Holodomor helps us to make sense of the horrific violence that Russians are waging in Ukraine today, I'll just give a brief snapshot at how I, as a genocide scholar, approach this case. So there are often questions raised about, for example, does starvation as a method of genocide, is that relevant to the conversation? It's not really. In the field of genocide studies, we don't look at the method of killing, we look at its intentionality. So we look at cases, as are represented musically tonight, where people were killed intentionally through a variety of different ways. We're looking again at their intentionality, not at a particular tool to commit this evil act. Another objection that people have asked about the Holodomor was it accidentally caused by famine? We have a lot more access to documents now, documents I've personally looked at, as have many others in this audience, and that case does not hold up to scrutiny. This type of question is actually also introduced in other cases, such as the Native American experience. So again, it is within the field of conversations. It is not something that is unknown in my field. So what do we do? Because we have authoritarian and totalitarian leaders like Stalin who would rarely feel the unequivocal need for confessions of genocidal guilt or even really to explain himself to his subordinates. Again, my field has been around since the Nuremberg trial days, and we've dealt with these questions in many cases. In the social sciences, we use proxy variables to infer intentionality, and so there is a lot of disagreement in our field, which is healthy for social science, but there are areas of consensus. We look for who is targeted. We look for evidence of men, women, and children being targeted, and we look for destructive violence, not just repression. And so, of course, we're seeing both of that happen in both the Holodomor, as my scholarly work talks about, as well as in contemporary Ukraine. And so in closing, I would just like to say that as Ukrainians are now working to defend and as we are supporting them against this horrific violence that's being escalated and orchestrated by Vladimir Putin but committed by many other Russians, the importance of knowing the Holodomor's historical veracity, its credibility within the field of comparative genocide studies, and its implications for free, independent Ukraine has been clearly expressed even on the battlefield. As the war rages on, there have been personal messages that have appeared on a growing arsenal of weapons, and there is one photograph on a missile, a Ukrainian missile, that says, translated into English, "For each grain in 1933." The stunning photograph demonstrates the intergenerational nature of Kremlin violence against Ukraine, as well as the intergenerational nature of courageous Ukrainian resistance. While Stalin nearly got away for many decades with his terrible crimes against Ukrainians, we can stand together today to ensure that the story ends very differently today. Thank you very much for having us, and we look forward to the musical program.
Thank you, dear professors, for your brief and informative remarks. And now, the concert, prepared by the American Music Festival Lincolnwood Chamber Orchestra, its conductor, Phil Simmons, and vocalist, Samir Hadzalic. You will have the pleasure of listening to music by Armenian, Bosnian, Ukrainian, and Jewish composers, those whose countries suffered from genocide or the Holocaust.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this beautiful church. Thank you to the Consulate of Ukraine for being here. Thank you for our collaboration with the Ukraine Genocide Famine Foundation, and to all our friends in the community for being here. And we are American Music Festivals. This is our third program with the Ukrainian community since the Russian invasion. Our first program was over at the museum, Ukrainian National Museum across the street. We did a program of Ukrainian and American music. Then we were here at the church in June, and we did a program of music of the nations that were supporting the effort, the humanitarian effort. And this is a program that I've been thinking about doing for a long time, a program to link some of the tragedies in Europe of nations and cultures that we've explored and made friends with, and bringing them all together today. So thank you for joining us, and we're going to continue now with two works. This is film music by the Ukrainian composer Myroslav Skoryk. His melody, which was written for a Soviet film in World War II, in which he portrayed some very intense emotions, and the piece has become very popular now since the war. And we'll go directly into Morton Gould's Elegy, a piece of music that was composed to a film that was a television movie called The Holocaust. I have a few words by the next composer, Alan Hovhannes, an American composer of Armenian descent who composed this wonderful Armenian Rhapsody. And these are his words. Composer, publisher, and performer unite in beautiful cooperation for altruism of a better civilization. The composer, as in old China, joins heaven and earth with threads of sounds. The publisher promptly prints the music, the performers promptly plays the music, and the world promptly receives the benediction. We're going to continue with two composers who perished in the Holocaust. These works are brilliantly arranged by our composer in residence, Ilya Levinson. The first is In the Bamboo Grove, which is written by Pavel Haas, who was murdered in Auschwitz. And the other, Unser Städtel brennt, Our Village is Burning, by Mordecai Gerabatig. And the first piece is originally for voice and piano, but we arranged it for a concert we did earlier this year at the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. It's based on Chinese folk tune, part of a set of songs. And the second piece is what I would consider to be protest music, because it asks the question, why? How did we let this happen? And he's referring to the Warsaw Ghetto being destroyed, and he himself was killed there in 1942. So really, these are the themes of our program today, bringing communities together and asking, how could this happen, and what should we do? And let's never forget that it happened, and work together to come up with a better world. We're American music festivals, and we reach out to many communities. And if you haven't visited our website, please do, AmericanMusicFestivals.org. And what a pleasure, what a privilege it is to experience these emotions, remember people who have passed, been taken from us. And when we had the idea of this program, we knew we needed to program some Bosnian music. For many years, we had a thriving program with the Bosnian community here in Chicago, and developed a great friendship with my colleague, Samir Hadzalic. And it's a thrill for us to have him back on the stage, singing the Sevdah songs. We're going to do two Sevdah songs, a Bembasha, which has a profound Sephardic influence. And if you haven't been to Sarajevo, it's a place where there's a synagogue, a church, and a mosque right on the same block. There was great tolerance there for many, many years. And our program's exploring the Srebrenica tragedy, our Jewish Muslim friendship program at the American Islamic College, and many statehood events. So Sam, welcome.
Thank you, American Music Festival, once again collaborating with the Ukrainian community, and this evening with the Ukrainian Genocide Famine Foundation. Thank you, dear guests, for attending this event and for supporting Ukraine with your donations. Thank you to the speakers, our conductor, the vocalist, and the musicians. Thank you very much for making this a memorable event for us.